Sir, is this your vehicle?
Yes, it's mine.
You don't really look like the type who owns a car like this. Where did you steal it from?
You might want to rethink what you just said. You're about to lose your job, man.
The gas station sat on the edge of a quiet suburban road, fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting a sterile glow onto polished concrete. It was late afternoon, still bright, still ordinary. The kind of place where nothing remarkable was supposed to happen. A red Ferrari idled near pump number 4, its engine purring softly, paint catching the sun like liquid fire. It didn't belong here. Or at least, that's what people thought. Cars like that weren't meant for places like this. Cheap fuel, cracked asphalt, a flickering soda machine near the door. The man standing beside it was calm. Impeccably dressed, even casually. Black leather shoes, pressed slacks, a fitted jacket loosened at the collar. He held the fuel nozzle with one hand and his phone in the other, eyes focused, posture relaxed. He had done this 1,000 times before. This exact routine, this exact indifference to the stares that always came with the car. He was used to being noticed. He was also used to being judged. Across the street, a patrol car slowed. The officer behind the wheel had already made up his mind before the tires rolled to a stop. He didn't see a successful professional refueling his own vehicle. He didn't see discipline, patience, or years of sacrifice. What he saw, what he decided to see, was a black man standing next to a car that didn't match the story he told himself about who belonged where. The patrol car turned in. The crunch of gravel announced authority long before the officer stepped out. The body camera activated automatically, a small red light blinking to life. The officer adjusted his belt, his eyes never leaving the man by the Ferrari. His jaw tightened, not with concern, but with certainty. The kind that doesn't ask questions because it believes it already knows the answers. "Hey," the officer called out, voice sharp, cutting through the ambient noise of the station. The man turned slowly. He didn't flinch. He never did. "Yes, officer," he replied, tone measured, respectful. The officer took a few steps closer, scanning the car, then the man, then the car again. He let the silence stretch just long enough to feel intentional. "Is this your vehicle?" The question wasn't neutral. It never was. "Yes," the man said plainly. "It is." The officer smirked, not openly, not yet, but enough to signal disbelief. He circled the Ferrari, peering into the windows, crouching slightly to inspect the rims, as if theft left fingerprints on chrome. "Uh-huh," he muttered. "And where'd you get it?" The man paused. He recognized the shift, the question behind the question. He answered anyway. "I bought it." The officer laughed. A short, humorless sound. "Right. And you've got paperwork for that." "I don't carry the title in my pocket," the man replied evenly. "But the registration is in the glove compartment." The officer stopped walking. His eyes hardened. "Step away from the vehicle." "For what reason?" the man asked. The officer's posture changed. His shoulders squared. His hand hovered closer to his weapon, not touching it, but reminding everyone it was there. "Because I asked you to." The man complied. Slowly, carefully. He set the nozzle back into place, raised his hand slightly, not high, just visible, and took 2 steps back. His expression remained calm, but something else was present now. Not fear, awareness. The officer opened the driver's side door without permission and rummaged through the glove box, tossing aside insurance cards and receipts until he found the registration. He read it once, then again. The name on it didn't match the story in his head. He looked back at the man. "This says you're the owner," the officer said, irritation creeping into his voice. "That's correct." The officer frowned. He wasn't satisfied. Facts rarely satisfied men who weren't looking for them. "What do you do for a living?" he asked. The man hesitated, just briefly. He understood the weight of the answer, how it could escalate or diffuse the situation, how it shouldn't matter, but always did. "I'm an attorney." The officer laughed again, louder this time. "Yeah? What kind of attorney?" "A civil rights attorney." That did it. The officer's face tightened, his demeanor shifting from suspicion to hostility. He took a step closer, invading space, voice lowering as if proximity created dominance. "Funny," he said. "You don't look like the kind of guy who owns a car like this." The words hung in the air. Heavy, indisputable. The man met his gaze. "What does that look like?" he asked quietly. The officer scoffed. Don't play dumb. I'm not, the man replied. I'm asking you to clarify. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in closer, his voice now audible to the body cam, to the universe, to the future. Where did you steal this car from? The station went silent. A woman near the soda machine froze. Another customer lowered his phone slowly, unsure whether to keep recording or pretend he hadn't seen anything. The man exhaled through his nose. I didn't steal anything, he said. And you're crossing a line. The officer pointed a finger at his chest. You don't tell me where the line is. The man nodded once. Slowly. Actually, he said, you just did. The officer's radio crackled. He ignored it. I could take you in right now, the officer said. Impound the car. Make this real inconvenient for you. The man's eyes never left his. If you do, he replied, you're about to lose your job. The officer laughed. Hard. You think you can threaten me? No, the man said calmly. I'm informing you. The officer stepped back, incredulous. You got some nerve. So do you, the man replied. And yours is being recorded. That was the moment the officer remembered the camera. His eyes flicked down just briefly. Too late. Backup arrived within minutes. A second officer approached, younger, quieter. He reviewed the registration, asked one neutral question, then nodded. Everything checks out, the second officer said. The first officer's jaw clenched. So we're just going to let him go? He snapped. There's no cause, the second officer replied. The first officer stared at the man, then at the Ferrari, then back again. He said nothing more. He returned to his cruiser without apology. The man watched him leave. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He got into his car and drove away. 3 weeks later, the footage was public. 3 months later, the lawsuit was filed. 9 months later, the city council voted in emergency session. The settlement was announced on a quiet Tuesday morning. $9 million. The officer was placed on administrative leave, then quietly dismissed. The department released a statement citing conduct inconsistent with departmental values. The man didn't buy another car. He didn't move. He didn't disappear. He went back to work. Because for him, the story was never about the Ferrari. It was about what happens when authority assumes guilt and forgets it's being watched. The body cam footage didn't explode online immediately. It crept, shared first in private group chats, then uploaded by a local activist account with barely 10,000 followers. The caption was restrained, almost clinical. Traffic stop? Or something else? Within hours, it crossed a threshold. By morning, it had 1 million views. By nightfall, national outlets were requesting the raw file. What made the footage unsettling wasn't volume or chaos. It was how ordinary it looked. No shouting, no sudden violence, just a slow, methodical erosion of dignity recorded in high definition. Analysts would later say that was precisely why it hit so hard. There was nowhere to hide intent when nothing dramatic happened. Only bias laid bare. The man watched the footage once. Only once. He didn't need to relive it. He already knew every pause, every inflection, every moment where the officer chose escalation over restraint. What interested him wasn't how people reacted. It was how institutions would respond when the mirror was held up to them. His firm advised patience. Media requests poured in, but he declined most of them. No interviews, no emotional statements. Just a short, written acknowledgement confirming the incident occurred and that legal options were being evaluated. That restraint frustrated commentators who wanted outrage. It also unsettled city officials who were used to controlling narratives before they solidified. Behind closed doors, the city's legal department convened emergency meetings. Not about guilt, about exposure. The footage was clean. The audio was clear. The officer's language required no interpretation. There was no procedural gray area to exploit. This wasn't a case that could be buried under technicalities or delayed into irrelevance. The police union released a statement within 48 hours. It emphasized stress, split-second decisions, and the dangers officers face daily. It avoided mentioning the Ferrari, or the question that triggered everything, or the line about not looking like the owner. Silence, it turned out, was an admission when everyone had already heard the words. Internal Affairs opened an investigation. The officer was placed on paid leave. His colleagues reacted predictably, some defensively, others quietly relieved. A few had seen this coming. They remembered earlier complaints, earlier warnings that never quite rose to the level of discipline. Patterns only became patterns once someone outside the system connected the dots. The lawsuit was filed with precision. No theatrics, no exaggerated claims. Just facts, timestamps, transcripts, and precedent. It named the officer, the department, and the city. It cited violations that were impossible to argue against without arguing against the footage itself. During discovery, emails surfaced, training records, prior complaints dismissed as unsubstantiated, a memo advising officers to be more mindful without specifying what that meant or why it mattered. Each document added weight, not emotional weight, legal weight, the kind that bends budgets and careers. The officer hired counsel. He maintained he was just doing his job. That phrase would appear in headlines stripped of context, then dissected mercilessly by former officers, prosecutors, and judges who knew exactly what the job required and what it did not. Depositions were brutal, not because of hostility, but because of silence. When asked why he assumed the vehicle was stolen, the officer hesitated. When asked what indicators he observed, he circled back to experience. When asked to define that experience, the answers thinned. The man sat through every session without interruption. He took notes. He watched the officer struggle to reconcile instinct with accountability. There was no satisfaction in it, only confirmation. Settlement negotiations began earlier than expected. Quietly, the city's insurers had done their math. Trial would cost more than money. It would cost narrative control. Jurors didn't need to be convinced when the evidence spoke in complete sentences. $9 million was not an admission of guilt, the city insisted. It never was. It was, however, an acknowledgement of risk, of certainty, of inevitability. When the settlement was announced, reactions split along predictable lines. Some called it justice. Others called it excessive. A smaller group asked the only question that mattered. Why did it take a lawsuit for this to be addressed? The officer resigned before termination could be finalized. No press conference, no apology, just paperwork. His badge was turned in quietly, the way it should have been handled years earlier. The department promised reforms, new training modules, updated policies, a renewed commitment to community trust. The language was familiar, necessary, perhaps, but familiar. The man returned to the same gas station weeks later. Same pump, different day. No cameras, no patrol car slowing across the street. Just fuel, receipt, and departure. Nothing happened. And that, more than the settlement, was the point. The courtroom phase never unfolded the way the public expected. There was no dramatic trial, no cross-examination that ended in a viral confession, no moment where the officer finally broke under pressure. The absence of spectacle disappointed some. It reassured others. To the man, it confirmed what he had known from the beginning. Systems rarely collapse loudly. They retreat quietly once they realize they can't win. Still, the legal aftermath mattered. Not symbolically, but structurally. The settlement agreement contained language most people would never read. Buried beneath headlines and dollar figures were policy mandates the city hadn't publicized. Mandatory bias auditing, independent review boards with subpoena power, body cam footage retention rules extended beyond the minimum. None of it made for compelling news segments, but all of it reshaped how authority would function when no one was watching. Inside the police department, morale fractured. Veterans complained the job had become impossible. Younger officers absorbed a different lesson, that discretion without discipline was a liability. Training rooms replayed the gas station footage frame by frame, not as punishment, but as warning. This is what happens when assumption replaces articulation. This is what happens when belief outruns cause. The officer, now a private citizen, struggled to adjust. The uniform had insulated him for years. Without it, explanations stopped working. Prospective employers searched his name. The footage followed. No jury had convicted him, but public record doesn't need verdicts. It needs evidence. He told friends he'd been misunderstood. that he'd been sacrificed, that the city paid millions just to make a problem go away. He was right about one thing. The problem had gone away, just not the way he meant. The man, meanwhile, became selective about his cases. He turned down lucrative offers. Corporate disputes bored him. He focused instead on quiet patterns, small towns, routine stops, familiar language. He didn't chase publicity. He built records, depositions, data, the slow architecture of accountability. At conferences, he was often asked how it felt, winning such a large settlement, becoming a symbol. He corrected them every time. I wasn't the story, he said. I was the evidence. The Ferrari remained, less as a luxury, more as an artifact, a reminder of how quickly perception could weaponize itself. He considered selling it once, decided against it, not out of defiance, but clarity. Ownership didn't need justification. Ever. Years later, the gas station remodeled. New lights, new pumps, no plaque, no acknowledgement, just asphalt where something ordinary had revealed something systemic. A new officer fueled up one afternoon, glanced at a passing red sports car, and looked away. Nothing happened, not because bias had vanished, but because consequences had been documented. And somewhere in the city's budget, $9 million stood as a line item no one wanted to explain again. Time did what outrage never could. It thinned the noise and left only residue, the kind that settles into policy manuals, training rooms, and quiet decision-making moments where no cameras are present to perform for. Years passed. The case became a reference point in law schools, mentioned briefly in lectures about Fourth Amendment limits and equal protection. Professors didn't dramatize it. They didn't need to. The facts were efficient. A stop without cause. An assumption without evidence. Language without restraint. Consequences without ambiguity. Recruits entering the academy watched a shortened version of the footage. Not the viral clips. The uncut version. Silence included. The pauses. The tone. Instructors didn't tell them what to think. They asked one question and let it hang. At what moment did this become indefensible? The room always answered differently. That was the lesson. The city never fully recovered its reputation, but it stabilized. Lawsuits dropped. Complaints shifted in nature. Officers learned to articulate before they acted, to justify before they escalated. Not out of enlightenment, but survival. Careers were shorter now. Records were permanent. Cameras remembered better than people did. The man continued practicing law. He never branded himself around the incident. Never led with it. But when younger attorneys asked how to handle encounters with authority, he didn't offer platitudes. Be calm, he told them. Be precise. And assume you're already being documented, because you are. He never demonized policing. He refused to. Institutions, he believed, didn't change through hatred. They changed through exposure. Through forcing systems to confront themselves without narrative cover. Occasionally, someone would recognize him. At airports. At conferences. Once, at another gas station. They would nod. Sometimes thank him. He accepted it politely, then redirected the conversation. Gratitude made him uncomfortable. This wasn't bravery. It was inevitability meeting record-keeping. He kept the body cam footage archived, not as a trophy, as precedent. On the anniversary of the settlement, a junior city official emailed him. Nothing formal, nothing public. Just a quiet acknowledgement. Training reforms were still in place. Oversight boards still active. The line item still cited in budget meetings as justification for caution. He didn't reply. Not because it didn't matter. Because the system remembering without being reminded was the entire point. The red Ferrari aged gracefully. Fewer miles. Less attention. It no longer turned heads the way it once did. Or maybe people had learned to look differently. Either way, the car had stopped being a question. One evening, he fueled up again. Different city. Different station. The nozzle clicked. The receipt printed. No patrol car slowed. No assumptions arrived before conversation. He drove away without thinking about it. And somewhere, an officer made a different choice. Not because of morality, but because history had receipts. That was the real cost. Not $9 million, but the end of plausible denial. If this story made you uncomfortable, that's the point. Real accountability doesn't come from noise. It comes from evidence, consequences, and refusing to look away when power is misused. Stories like this don't surface by accident. They surface because someone records, someone questions, and someone holds the system to its own rules. And there are countless cases that never make headlines, unless platforms like this exist to expose them. If you believe these stories matter, like this video. If you want more real breakdowns, real footage analysis, and real accountability, subscribe to Black Rights TV. This channel isn't about outrage, it's about truth on record. Now I want to hear from you. At what moment did this stop feel wrong to you? The first question, the tone, or the assumption? Drop your answer in the comments. Conversations like this are how patterns stop repeating.